Welcome to One Book, One Coffee, where we take a deep dive into books that challenge the mind and nourish the soul. Today, you've chosen The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm, and by doing so, you've distinguished yourself from the crowd. In a world where it's all too easy to get lost in the endless scroll of social media or binge-watch the latest series, you've opted for something greater. You've chosen to invest in yourself, to learn and to grow. The Art of Loving is no ordinary book. It's a profound exploration of love as an art form, an endeavor that requires knowledge, effort, and dedication. This book matters because it challenges the conventional notion that love is something that simply happens to us, and instead proposes that love is something we must actively cultivate. Notable figures like the philosopher Alain de Botton have praised this book for its insightful approach to understanding human relationships. Erich Fromm was a renowned psychoanalyst and social philosopher, whose works have left a lasting impact on the way we perceive love, freedom, and human nature. Born in Germany in 1900, Fromm's experiences during two world wars led him to explore themes of love and freedom in a world filled with chaos. His personal struggles and observations of human behavior are beautifully interwoven into this book, offering us a guide to achieving genuine love. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Picture yourself sitting across from a friend who just asked you the most deceptively simple question imaginable. What is love? You'd probably pause, maybe laugh a little, and realize you're about to dive into something far deeper than you initially thought. This is exactly where Erich Fromm begins his masterpiece, The Art of Loving, and it's where we find ourselves today with our coffee growing cold as we explore one of humanity's most profound mysteries. Fromm doesn't waste time with romantic platitudes or greeting card wisdom. Instead, he does something radical for his time, and frankly, still radical today. He treats love as a skill that can be learned, developed, and mastered. Think about this for a moment. We spend years learning to drive a car, months training for a new job, countless hours perfecting our favorite hobby. Yet when it comes to love, we somehow expect to just naturally excel at it. We treat love like catching a cold, something that happens to us rather than something we actively create and cultivate. Now, here's where Fromm's insight becomes particularly fascinating. He argues that most of what we call love isn't actually love at all, but rather various forms of emotional dependency dressed up in romantic clothing. Picture the classic scenario. Two people meet, feel that intoxicating rush of attraction and connection, and declare they've found their soulmate. Fast forward 6 months, and they're wondering where all that magic went. Fromm would say the magic was never love to begin with. It was simply the temporary dissolution of loneliness, the brief illusion that we'd found someone to complete us. This brings us to one of Fromm's most revolutionary ideas about the nature of love itself. He distinguishes between what he calls falling in love and the art of loving. Falling in love, he suggests, is actually quite easy and requires no skill whatsoever. It's passive, it happens to us, and it's fundamentally about our own needs and desires. We fall in love with how someone makes us feel about ourselves, not necessarily with who they truly are. The art of loving, however, is something entirely different. It's active. It requires discipline and practice, and it's fundamentally about giving rather than receiving. Consider how this plays out in our modern world of dating apps and instant connections. We swipe through potential partners like we're browsing a catalog, looking for someone who meets our checklist of desires. But Fromm would argue that this entire approach misses the point. Love isn't about finding the right person to fill our emotional gaps. It's about becoming the kind of person capable of truly loving another human being, regardless of how perfectly they match our wish list. Fromm identifies several elements that must be present for genuine love to exist, and they might surprise you. The first is care, which goes far beyond simply feeling affectionate towards someone. True care means taking responsibility for another person's growth and well-being. Think of a gardener tending to a plant. The gardener doesn't love the plant because it's already perfect. The gardener's love is expressed through the daily acts of watering, pruning, and providing the right conditions for growth. The second element is responsibility, but not in the heavy, burdensome sense we often associate with that word. Fromm means responsibility as the ability to respond to another person's needs, both spoken and unspoken. It's the difference between a parent who feeds their child, because it's their duty, and a parent who notices when their child is struggling emotionally and responds with presence and understanding. Then there's respect, which Fromm defines as the ability to see another person as they are, not as we need them to be. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of love in our selfie-obsessed, projection-heavy culture. How often do we love someone for who we imagine they could become, rather than accepting and cherishing who they are right now? Real respect means loving someone without trying to change them, supporting their authentic self even when it's inconvenient for us. Finally, there's knowledge, the deep understanding that comes from genuine curiosity about another person's inner world. This isn't the surface-level knowledge of their favorite color or coffee order, but the profound understanding of their fears, dreams, and the experiences that shaped them. It requires what Fromm calls the courage to let go of our own ego, long enough to truly see and understand another human being. Now, think about this in terms of the different types of love Fromm explores. Brotherly love, the most fundamental form, is characterized by care and responsibility for any human being. It's the recognition that we're all struggling through this human experience together. Motherly love represents unconditional acceptance and nurturing, while fatherly love embodies guidance and the encouragement to grow. Erotic love, perhaps the most misunderstood, isn't primarily about physical attraction, but about the deep desire to know and be known by one specific person. And finally, there's self-love, which Fromm argues is not narcissism, but the foundation that makes all other forms of love possible. As we wrap up this exploration of love's meaning, consider how radically different our relationships might be if we approached them as artists approach their craft, with dedication, practice, and the understanding that mastery takes time. Fromm's vision of love isn't about finding someone to complete us, but about becoming complete enough ourselves to truly give to another. In our next conversation, we'll explore how this understanding can transform not just our romantic relationships, but our entire approach to being human in a world that desperately needs more genuine love. Picture this. You're sitting across from a friend who's just asked you one of life's most fundamental questions. What exactly is love? You pause, coffee cup halfway to your lips, because suddenly you realize that despite all the songs, movies, and poetry about love, you're not entirely sure how to answer. Well, my friend, you're in excellent company, because Erich Fromm spent considerable time wrestling with this very question in what might be one of the most profound sections of his masterwork. Fromm begins his theoretical framework with a startling proposition that challenges everything our culture teaches us about love. He suggests that most of us have been thinking about love completely backwards. We've been asking, how can I be loved, when we should be asking, how can I love? It's like spending your whole life trying to become a better receiver of gifts while never learning how to give them. Think about this for a moment. When you scroll through social media or watch romantic comedies, what's the underlying message? It's usually about finding someone who will love you, adore you, complete you. But Fromm argues this approach is fundamentally flawed, because it treats love as something that happens to you rather than something you actively do. Here's where Fromm gets really interesting. He proposes that love is an art, much like painting or playing the piano. Now, imagine if someone told you they wanted to become a great pianist, but they never intended to practice, study music theory, or learn about different composers. You'd probably laugh, right? Yet this is exactly how most people approach love. They expect to stumble into it naturally, as if it requires no skill, no knowledge, no practice. Fromm suggests this is precisely why so many relationships fail, and why so many people feel perpetually unsatisfied in their romantic lives. The theoretical foundation Fromm builds rests on a crucial insight about human nature. He argues that love emerges from our fundamental human condition, our separateness. Picture a newborn baby, completely merged with its mother's world, knowing no boundaries between self and other. As we grow, we gradually become aware of our individual existence, and with this awareness comes what Fromm calls the deepest need of man, the need to overcome separateness and achieve union with another person. But here's the catch. There are many ways to attempt this union, and most of them are actually pseudo-solutions that create the illusion of connection without the reality. Consider how people try to escape their separateness today. Some lose themselves in work, becoming so busy that they never have to confront their aloneness. Others dive into social media, surrounding themselves with hundreds of connections that often lack genuine intimacy. Still others seek what Fromm calls orgiastic states, whether through alcohol, drugs, or even the temporary fusion of sexual climax, hoping to temporarily dissolve the boundaries of self. But these solutions, Fromm argues, are like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. They might provide momentary relief, but they ultimately make the underlying problem worse. True love, according to Fromm's theory, is the only satisfactory answer to the problem of human existence. But, and this is crucial, it's not the kind of love most people think they want. It's not about finding your other half, or having someone complete you. Instead, mature love is what Fromm calls a union that preserves individuality. Think of it like two accomplished musicians playing a duet. Each maintains their own distinct voice and skill, but together they create something beautiful that neither could achieve alone. This brings us to one of Fromm's most revolutionary ideas, the difference between immature love and mature love. Immature love says, "I love you because I need you." It's the love of dependency, of trying to fill an inner emptiness through another person. We see this everywhere in modern culture. The person who can't be alone for 5 minutes without feeling anxious. The couple who become so enmeshed they lose their individual identities. The relationship where one person becomes the entire source of the other's happiness and self-worth. Mature love, by contrast, declares, "I need you because I love you." It flows from abundance rather than scarcity, from strength rather than weakness. The person capable of mature love has developed what Fromm calls productive orientation. They've learned to be fully present in their own life, to develop their own capacities, to stand on their own feet emotionally and spiritually. Only then can they offer genuine love to another person. Now, think about this in practical terms. How many relationships have you seen where two people are essentially trying to use each other as emotional life support systems? They're constantly seeking reassurance, validation, proof that they're lovable. But what happens when both people are looking to receive rather than give? It's like two people drowning, each hoping the other will save them. Fromm's theory suggests that love is fundamentally an activity, not a passive emotion. It requires what he identifies as 4 essential elements, but more than that, it demands that we develop our capacity to love as we would develop any other skill. This means taking responsibility for our own emotional development, learning to be alone without being lonely, and cultivating what he calls the productive character. As we prepare to explore these deeper elements of love, remember that Fromm isn't just offering us abstract philosophy. He's providing a roadmap for one of life's most important journeys, learning how to love well. Because ultimately, the quality of our love determines the quality of our life, and understanding its true nature is the first step toward mastering this most essential of human arts. You know how we've been talking about love as an art that requires knowledge and practice? Well, now we're getting to the really exciting part where Erich Fromm shows us exactly how to put all this theory into action. Think of it like this. We've learned what love is. We understand why it's so difficult in our modern world. But now comes the million-dollar question. How do we actually practice love in our daily lives? Fromm begins this section with a fascinating insight that might surprise you. He argues that learning to love is remarkably similar to learning any other art form. Picture a pianist sitting down at their instrument. They don't just play beautiful music on their first try, do they? No, they spend countless hours practicing scales, developing discipline, cultivating concentration, and above all, they must genuinely care about mastering their craft. Love, Fromm tells us, demands the exact same dedication. But here's where it gets really interesting. The practice of love isn't something you do for 2 hours on Tuesday evenings like a yoga class. It's a way of being that permeates every aspect of your existence. Think about this for a moment. When you're truly practicing love, you're not just being loving toward your romantic partner or your children. You're developing a loving orientation toward life itself. Fromm introduces us to 4 fundamental elements that form the foundation of practicing love, and the first one might catch you off guard: discipline. Now, before you roll your eyes and think about rigid schedules and harsh self-control, hear me out. The discipline Fromm talks about isn't about forcing yourself into uncomfortable patterns. Instead, it's about developing a rhythm of life that feels natural and authentic to who you are. It's like a jazz musician who has practiced so much that improvisation flows effortlessly. When you develop discipline in love, being caring, respectful, and responsible becomes second nature rather than a struggle. Consider someone you know who seems naturally loving. Maybe it's your grandmother who always has time to listen, or that friend who remembers everyone's birthdays and somehow makes each person feel special. What you're witnessing isn't accidental kindness. It's the result of years of practicing loving behavior until it becomes as natural as breathing. The second element is concentration, and this is where our modern world throws us some serious curveballs. Think about your typical day. How many times are you fully present with another person? Really present, not scrolling through your phone while half listening to your partner talk about their day, not mentally planning tomorrow's meetings while your child tells you about school. Fromm argues that true concentration means being completely available to the person in front of you. It's about quality of attention, not quantity of time. Here's a beautiful way to think about it. Imagine love as sunlight. You can have sunlight scattered across a huge field, and it's pleasant and warm, but it doesn't have much power. But take that same sunlight and concentrate it through a magnifying glass, and suddenly you can start a fire. Concentrated attention in relationships has that same transformative power. The third element is patience. And oh, how we struggle with this one in our instant gratification culture. We want love to bloom immediately, relationships to deepen overnight, and personal growth to happen as quickly as downloading an app. But Fromm reminds us that love operates on nature's timeline, not technology's. Think about growing a garden. You can't make a tomato ripen faster by checking on it every 5 minutes. Love requires the same kind of patient trust in natural processes. This doesn't mean being passive or accepting poor treatment. Rather, it's about understanding that genuine intimacy, trust, and deep connection unfold gradually. It's about giving people space to reveal themselves authentically rather than demanding immediate emotional access. The fourth and perhaps most crucial element is what Fromm calls supreme concern, and this is where love becomes truly transformative. This means that practicing love becomes the most important thing in your life, not because you're obsessed or codependent, but because you recognize that your capacity to love determines the quality of your entire existence. Now think about this. What if you approached every interaction with the question, how can I bring more love into this moment? Not in a cheesy, artificial way, but with genuine curiosity about how to be more present, more understanding, more genuinely helpful. Imagine having that conversation with your difficult coworker, or dealing with that frustrating customer service call, or even just passing a stranger on the street. Fromm also emphasizes something that's particularly relevant in our age of social media and constant connectivity. The practice of love requires solitude. This might seem contradictory at first. How can being alone help you love others better? But think about it this way. If you can't be comfortable with yourself, if you're constantly seeking external validation or distraction, how can you offer genuine presence to someone else? The practice of solitude isn't about isolation. It's about developing a rich inner life that you can then share authentically with others. As we wrap up this exploration of love's practice, remember that Fromm isn't offering us a quick fix or a simple formula. He's inviting us into a lifelong journey of growth and discovery. The practice of love is ultimately the practice of becoming fully human, fully alive, and fully connected to the beautiful complexity of existence itself. Picture this. You're sitting in a cafe, watching couples around you, and something feels off. They're physically together, maybe even holding hands, but there's this invisible wall between them. They're scrolling through their phones, barely making eye contact, going through the motions of love without really being present. This scene would have fascinated Erich Fromm because it perfectly captures what he saw happening to love in our modern world. Fromm believed that love, this most fundamental human capacity, was slowly disintegrating before our eyes. Not because people had stopped caring, but because the very fabric of our society was making authentic love increasingly difficult to achieve and maintain. Think about it. When was the last time you witnessed or experienced love that felt truly alive, growing, and transformative rather than routine, possessive, or conditional? The heart of Fromm's argument lies in understanding that love isn't just a feeling that happens to us. It's an art that requires practice, dedication, and the right conditions to flourish. But here's the problem. Our modern world systematically destroys those conditions. We live in what Fromm called a market-oriented society, where everything, including human relationships, gets reduced to transactions. We approach love like we're shopping for the perfect product, constantly comparing, evaluating, and wondering if we could do better. Consider how we talk about relationships today. We invest in them. We look for someone who adds value to our lives. We worry about getting a good deal. Dating apps have turned this market mentality into literal reality. We swipe through potential partners like we're browsing an online catalog, making split-second decisions based on carefully curated profiles. But love, real love, can't be commodified this way. It's not about finding the person with the best features or the most attractive package deal. Fromm observed that this market orientation creates what he called pseudo-love, relationships that look like love from the outside but lack its essential qualities. Instead of the genuine care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge that characterize mature love, we get possessiveness masquerading as devotion, dependency disguised as intimacy, and control presented as caring. How many relationships have you seen where one person says, "I can't live without you," and calls it romantic, when really it's a confession of their own emotional emptiness? The disintegration of love also happens through what Fromm identified as the modern emphasis on having rather than being. We want to have a relationship, have a partner, have love, rather than focusing on being loving people. This shift is subtle but profound. When you're focused on having love, you're constantly worried about losing it, controlling it, or not getting enough of it. When you're focused on being loving, you're developing your capacity to give, to understand, to grow alongside another person. Now think about this. How often do we hear people say they fell out of love, as if love were something that just happened to them, like catching a cold? This passive language reveals how we've misunderstood love's nature. Fromm would say they never fell into real love in the first place. They fell into infatuation, projection, or mutual need satisfaction. Real love doesn't just disappear. It either grows or it reveals itself to have been something else entirely. The pace of modern life compounds these problems. Authentic love requires time to truly know another person, time to develop trust, time to work through conflicts and grow together. But we live in an instant gratification culture where we expect immediate results and perfect compatibility. If a relationship requires effort or doesn't feel effortless, we assume we're with the wrong person rather than recognizing that love is work, joyful, meaningful work, but work nonetheless. Social media has added another layer to love's disintegration. We're constantly exposed to curated versions of other people's relationships, creating impossible standards and feeding our market mentality. We see highlight reels and assume they represent reality, making our own relationships seem inadequate by comparison. The very platforms that promise to connect us often leave us feeling more isolated and dissatisfied with what we have. Fromm also pointed to the breakdown of traditional communities and extended families as contributing factors. In the past, relationships existed within larger networks of support and accountability. Now, couples are often isolated, expected to meet all of each other's emotional needs without the wisdom and support that comes from being embedded in caring communities. This puts impossible pressure on romantic relationships and sets them up for failure. Perhaps most tragically, the disintegration of love perpetuates itself across generations. Children who grow up witnessing pseudo-love learn to replicate these patterns. They internalize the idea that love is conditional, possessive, or transactional. They never learn what it means to love unconditionally or to be loved for who they truly are rather than for what they can provide. But here's what's beautiful about Fromm's analysis. He's not just diagnosing the problem. He's showing us that understanding these patterns is the first step toward breaking free from them. When we recognize how our culture shapes our approach to love, we can begin to make different choices. We can choose depth over excitement, growth over comfort, being over having. This understanding becomes our foundation for exploring what Fromm calls the theory of love, his blueprint for what authentic love actually looks like, and how we can cultivate it in our own lives, even within the challenges of our modern world. Picture this. You're sitting across from someone you deeply care about, maybe over dinner or during a quiet evening walk, and they ask you a seemingly simple question that stops you in your tracks. Who do you love? Your mind probably races through the obvious answers first: your partner, your family, your closest friends. But then Fromm throws us a curveball that's both uncomfortable and enlightening. He insists that before we can truly love anyone else, we must first master the art of loving ourselves. Not in a selfish, narcissistic way, but in the most fundamental sense of what it means to be human. Now think about this for a moment. When was the last time you treated yourself with the same kindness and patience you'd show a good friend going through a tough time? Most of us, if we're being honest, have an inner critic that would make even the harshest boss seem gentle by comparison. Fromm argues that this internal relationship we have with ourselves becomes the template for every other loving relationship in our lives. It's like trying to give someone directions to a place you've never been. How can you guide others toward love if you haven't learned to navigate that territory within yourself? But here's where Fromm's insight becomes particularly fascinating. Self-love, in his view, isn't about looking in the mirror and telling yourself you're wonderful, though that's certainly better than the alternative. It's about developing what he calls a genuine concern for your own growth, happiness, and well-being. Think of it like being your own best parent, not indulgent or permissive, but truly caring about your development as a human being. This means sometimes saying no to things that feel good in the moment but harm you in the long run, and yes to challenges that help you grow, even when they're uncomfortable. Consider Sarah, a friend of mine who spent years in relationships where she constantly gave and gave until she was emotionally depleted. She thought this was love, this endless sacrifice of her own needs for others. But what she discovered, through some painful trial and error, was that she had never learned to value herself enough to set healthy boundaries. Once she began treating herself with the same care she showed others, something magical happened. Her relationships became more balanced, more genuine, more alive. The people in her life started respecting her more because she had finally learned to respect herself. This brings us to one of Fromm's most revolutionary ideas about loving others. He suggests that the phrase, "I love you," often masks a much more self-centered reality. I need you, or I want to possess you, or you make me feel good about myself. True love of another person, according to Fromm, requires what he calls an active concern for the life and growth of that person. It's the difference between loving someone because of what they do for you and loving them for who they are and who they're becoming. Now imagine the difference between these two scenarios. In the first, you love your partner because they make you laugh, support your dreams, and fit perfectly into the life you've imagined for yourself. In the second, you love your partner because you genuinely care about their happiness and growth, even when that growth might take them in directions that challenge or inconvenience you. The first is what Fromm might call symbiotic love. It feels like love, but it's really about filling gaps in yourself. The second is mature love, where you're complete enough in yourself to truly wish for another's flourishing. This distinction becomes even more complex when we think about romantic love, which Fromm treats with both reverence and a healthy dose of skepticism. He acknowledges the intoxicating power of falling in love, that incredible feeling of finding someone who seems to complete you, who makes the world suddenly make sense. But he also warns us that this initial euphoria, while beautiful, often mistakes intensity for depth. Real romantic love, he argues, develops when two people who have learned to love themselves choose to build something together that honors both their individual growth and their shared journey. Think about the couples you know who have been together for decades and still seem genuinely excited about each other. What you're witnessing isn't the perpetual honeymoon phase. It's something much rarer and more valuable. These are people who have learned to love each other not despite their changes and growth over the years, but because of them. They've mastered what Fromm calls the art of loving the person their partner is becoming, not just the person they fell in love with years ago. But perhaps the most challenging object of love that Fromm discusses is what he calls universal love, the capacity to care about people beyond our immediate circle, including strangers and even those we might consider enemies. This isn't about becoming a doormat or ignoring real harm, but about developing what we might call an expanded heart. It's recognizing that the person who cuts you off in traffic, the difficult coworker, the politician whose views infuriate you, they're all struggling with the same fundamental human challenges of loneliness, fear, and the search for meaning that you are. As we move forward in exploring Fromm's insights, we'll discover that these different objects of love aren't separate categories but interconnected aspects of a single skill. The ability to truly see, understand, and care for the human experience in all its complexity and beauty. Picture yourself sitting in your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your mug, and someone asks you a question that stops you mid-sip. Do you think love is something that just happens to you, or is it something you have to learn? This seemingly simple question opens the door to one of the most revolutionary ideas in Erich Fromm's masterpiece, the art of loving. The radical notion that love isn't just a feeling that strikes us like lightning, but an art form that requires dedication, practice, and genuine skill. Now think about this for a moment. We live in a world obsessed with love stories, yet how much time do we actually spend learning how to love? We'll dedicate years to mastering a musical instrument, spend countless hours perfecting our cooking skills, or invest enormous energy into advancing our careers. But when it comes to love, arguably the most important aspect of human existence, we somehow expect to be naturally gifted. Fromm challenges this assumption head-on, suggesting that our casual approach to love might be exactly why so many relationships crumble, and why so many people feel profoundly lonely despite being surrounded by others. Fromm begins by dismantling one of our culture's most cherished myths, that love is primarily about being loved rather than loving. Think about how we talk about romance in our everyday conversations. We say things like, "I fell in love," or "love happened to us," as if we're passive recipients of some cosmic force. We obsess over whether someone loves us back, whether we're attractive enough, successful enough, interesting enough to be chosen. This mindset, Fromm argues, turns love into a commodity, something we try to acquire rather than something we actively create and give. Imagine love as painting, Fromm suggests. A true artist doesn't stand in front of a blank canvas hoping that a masterpiece will magically appear. Instead, they study color theory, practice brush techniques, understand composition, and develop their unique vision through years of dedicated work. Similarly, loving someone well requires us to develop specific capacities. The ability to care genuinely for another's well-being, to take responsibility for our impact on their life, to respect their individual nature without trying to change them, and to truly know them beyond our projections and fantasies. But here's where Fromm's insight becomes particularly relevant to our modern world. We live in what he calls a marketing orientation society, where everything, including ourselves, becomes a product to be sold. We curate our social media profiles like advertisements, swipe through dating apps like we're shopping for accessories, and even in relationships, we often focus more on what we're getting than what we're giving. This marketplace mentality seeps into our understanding of love, making us believe that if we just package ourselves correctly, we'll attract the right buyer. Consider how this plays out in contemporary dating culture. Someone might spend hours perfecting their dating profile, choosing photos that highlight their best angles, crafting witty bios designed to attract matches. But how much time do they spend developing their capacity for empathy, learning to listen without immediately planning their response, or examining their own patterns of emotional reactivity? It's like trying to become a great chef by focusing entirely on restaurant marketing while never actually learning to cook. Fromm illustrates this point with a powerful observation about modern loneliness. Despite being more connected than ever before through technology, rates of depression, anxiety, and feelings of isolation continue to climb. Why? Because we've confused being chosen with being loved, and being entertained with being truly known. Real love, Fromm argues, requires us to move beyond our narcissistic preoccupations and develop what he calls productive orientation, the ability to use our powers to create, to give, and to care for life itself. Now you might be wondering, what does this actually look like in practice? Fromm suggests that learning the art of loving begins with developing our general capacity for love, not just romantic love. This means cultivating love for life itself, for other human beings, for the natural world, and yes, for ourselves in a mature, non-narcissistic way. Someone who can only love their romantic partner while remaining indifferent or hostile to others hasn't really learned to love at all. They've simply formed an exclusive attachment. Think about someone in your life who you consider genuinely loving. Chances are, their warmth isn't reserved only for their spouse or children. They probably show care and consideration to the grocery store clerk, genuine interest in their coworkers' well-being, and concern for social issues beyond their immediate circle. This isn't because they're trying to be good people. It's because they've developed love as a fundamental orientation toward life. This brings us to perhaps Fromm's most challenging insight, that learning to love requires us to overcome our basic human tendency toward narcissism, not the clinical kind, but the everyday self-centeredness that makes us interpret everything through the lens of how it affects us personally. True love requires what Fromm calls transcending one's narcissistic self, developing the ability to care about someone else's experience as much as our own. As we prepare to dive deeper into Fromm's exploration of love's various forms and the specific skills it requires, remember that he's not asking us to become saints or to love everyone equally. Instead, he's inviting us to consider love as a practice worthy of our most serious attention. An art form that, when mastered, doesn't just improve our relationships, but transforms our entire experience of being alive. After all, in a world that often feels fractured and disconnected, perhaps learning to love well is the most practical skill any of us could develop. You know, we've been exploring Fromm's beautiful insights about what love really is, and now we come to perhaps the most practical part of his entire book. Because here's the thing about love that most of us get completely backwards. We think love is something that just happens to us, like catching a cold or winning the lottery. We wait for it, hope for it, maybe even pray for it. But Fromm is about to turn that whole idea on its head. Love, he argues, is an art that requires practice, discipline, and yes, actual work. Think about this for a moment. If you wanted to become a skilled pianist, you wouldn't just sit at the piano once a week and expect magic to happen, would you? You'd practice scales, study theory, develop your technique daily. Yet somehow, when it comes to love, we expect to be naturally gifted without any real effort. It's almost absurd when you think about it that way. Fromm begins this section by emphasizing that the practice of loving requires discipline. Now, before you roll your eyes and think this sounds like some kind of boot camp for the heart, hear him out. The discipline he's talking about isn't rigid or harsh. It's more like the gentle, consistent discipline of a gardener who waters their plants every day, not because it's exciting, but because they understand that growth requires steady attention. He talks about developing concentration, which in our world of constant notifications and endless distractions feels almost revolutionary. When was the last time you had a conversation with someone where you weren't thinking about your phone, your to-do list, or what you were going to say next? Fromm suggests that real love requires us to be fully present with another person, not just physically present, but emotionally and mentally present. It's like the difference between hearing music playing in the background while you're busy with something else, versus sitting down and really listening to every note, every harmony, every subtle shift in rhythm. The beautiful thing about Fromm's approach is how he connects this inner work to our ability to love others. He argues that you cannot give what you don't have. If you're constantly anxious, scattered, or disconnected from yourself, how can you offer genuine presence to someone else? It's like trying to pour water from an empty pitcher. This isn't selfish self-focus, it's practical wisdom. The person who has learned to be at peace with themselves, who has developed patience and understanding in their relationship with their own thoughts and emotions, naturally has more to offer in their relationships with others. One of the most striking things Fromm discusses is the practice of objectivity. Now, this might sound cold or detached, but he means something quite different. Objectivity in love means seeing the other person as they really are, not as a projection of your needs, fears, or fantasies. How often do we fall in love with our idea of someone rather than the actual person? We meet someone and immediately start writing a story about who they are, what they represent, how they'll complete us or solve our problems. Real love, Fromm suggests, requires the courage to see clearly, without the rose-colored glasses of infatuation or the dark filters of our past disappointments. This connects to what he calls the development of reason. Not cold, calculating logic, but the kind of wisdom that comes from understanding patterns, motivations, and the deeper currents that drive human behavior. It's like becoming a student of the human heart, not just your own, but the universal experiences that connect us all. When you understand that someone's anger might really be fear, or that their withdrawal might actually be a form of self-protection, you can respond with compassion instead of taking everything personally. Fromm also emphasizes the importance of faith, though not necessarily in a religious sense. He's talking about faith in the potential of human beings to grow, to change, to become more than they are today. Think about the people you love most. Don't you hold a kind of faith that they're capable of wisdom, kindness, and growth, even when they're not showing their best selves in the moment? This faith isn't naive optimism. It's a deep trust in the human capacity for transformation. Perhaps most importantly, Fromm talks about the practice of activity in love. Not busyness or constant doing, but what he calls spontaneous activity that flows from your authentic self. It's the difference between going through the motions of loving gestures and actions that genuinely spring from care and understanding. When you bring someone their favorite coffee, not because you think you should, but because you genuinely want to bring them a moment of pleasure, that's the kind of activity Fromm means. He reminds us that all of this requires patience. In our instant gratification culture, this might be the hardest lesson of all. Love develops slowly, like a tree growing strong roots before it reaches toward the sky. The relationships that last, the ones that truly nourish us, are built through countless small moments of choosing to understand rather than to judge, to give rather than to take, to be present rather than to escape. What makes Fromm's approach so compelling is that it's not about becoming perfect before you can love. It's about understanding that the very act of practicing love, with all its stumbles and failures, is what makes us more loving people. Every time you choose patience over irritation, curiosity over judgment, or presence over distraction, you're strengthening your capacity to love. As we move forward in exploring Fromm's insights, keep this central truth in mind. Love is not a feeling that happens to you, but a skill you develop through conscious, daily practice. So we've been exploring Erich Fromm's profound insights about love, and now we need to face something that might make us a bit uncomfortable. Because here's the thing about love that nobody really wants to admit: it's incredibly difficult. Not the butterflies in your stomach, write poetry at midnight kind of difficult. I'm talking about the deep, soul-challenging work that authentic love demands of us every single day. Think about this for a moment. We live in a world that sells us love like it's a product on a shelf. Swipe right, find your match, live happily ever after. But Fromm understood something that our modern culture seems to have forgotten entirely. Love isn't something that happens to you like catching a cold or winning the lottery. Love is an art, and like any art worth mastering, it comes with challenges that can either break us or transform us completely. The first challenge Fromm identifies is perhaps the most painful one to acknowledge. Most of us don't actually know how to be alone. Picture this scenario. You're sitting in a coffee shop and you see someone at a corner table, no phone, no book, no laptop, just sitting there with their thoughts. What's your first reaction? You probably think something's wrong with them, right? We've become so afraid of solitude that we confuse being alone with being lonely. And this confusion creates a fundamental problem in how we approach love. When we can't stand our own company, we end up using other people as escape routes from ourselves. We fall in love not because we're drawn to someone's authentic self, but because being with them feels better than being alone with our own anxieties, insecurities, and unresolved issues. It's like trying to build a house on quicksand. The foundation simply isn't there. Fromm tells us that authentic love requires what he calls aloneness. Not the desperate isolation of loneliness, but the peaceful self-possession of someone who has learned to enjoy their own company. When you can sit with yourself without immediately reaching for distractions, when you can face your own thoughts and feelings without running away, only then can you offer someone else your genuine presence rather than your neediness. But here's where it gets even more challenging. Our culture has trained us to think of love as a feeling, something that either exists or doesn't, something that's either there or it's gone. You've heard people say things like, "I just don't feel it anymore," or "the spark died," as if love were some kind of magical electricity that either flows or doesn't. Fromm challenges this entire way of thinking by suggesting that love is primarily an activity, not a passive emotion. Now think about this. What if love is more like playing piano than like being struck by lightning? A pianist doesn't sit down and hope inspiration strikes. They practice scales, they work through difficult passages, they show up every day whether they feel like it or not. The beautiful music comes from discipline, commitment, and the willingness to push through the moments when their fingers don't want to cooperate. This leads us to one of the most difficult challenges of authentic love: the challenge of discipline in an instant gratification world. We live in an era where everything can be delivered to our door in 24 hours, where we can skip songs we don't like immediately, where we can block people with the tap of a finger. But love operates on a completely different timeline. Love asks us to stay present during the boring parts, the difficult conversations, the moments when someone we care about is struggling, and there's nothing we can do to fix it quickly. I remember Fromm writing about how modern people approach love like consumers at a market. We create mental checklists of what we want in a partner: tall, funny, successful, shares our interests, as if we're shopping for a car with the right features. But authentic love, Fromm argues, isn't about finding someone who meets our specifications. It's about developing the capacity to see and appreciate the unique humanity in another person, even when they don't fit our preconceived notions of what we thought we wanted. This brings us to perhaps the most profound challenge: learning to love someone not for how they make us feel, but for who they actually are. This is revolutionary thinking in a world that constantly asks us what we're getting out of our relationships. When someone asks you why you love your partner, notice what comes out of your mouth. Do you talk about how they make you laugh, how safe they make you feel, how they support your dreams? All beautiful things, but notice how it's all about what they do for you. Fromm challenges us to flip this entirely. Can you love someone simply because they exist? Can you appreciate their struggles, their growth, their unique way of seeing the world, even when it has nothing to do with you? This isn't about becoming a doormat or ignoring your own needs. It's about expanding your capacity to care beyond the boundaries of your own self-interest. The final challenge that Fromm presents might be the most difficult of all in our current moment: learning to love in a world that profits from our loneliness and insecurity. Every advertisement, every social media platform, every dating app makes money by convincing us that we're incomplete, that happiness is just one purchase or one swipe away. Authentic love requires us to resist this constant messaging and instead cultivate contentment with what is, while remaining open to genuine connection. As we move forward in our exploration of Fromm's wisdom, keep these challenges in mind. They're not obstacles to overcome once and then forget about. They're the ongoing work of anyone who wants to love authentically in a world that often seems designed to make that as difficult as possible. You know, there's something beautifully twisted about love that most of us never really stop to consider. We're sitting here with our coffee, maybe thinking about someone we care about, and if we're honest, love feels like the most natural thing in the world and simultaneously the most confusing. Erich Fromm understood this contradiction better than almost anyone, and in this section of The Art of Loving, he pulls back the curtain on what he calls the fundamental paradoxes of love. Picture this for a moment. You're scrolling through your social media feed and you see post after post about love. Someone's engagement photos, a couple celebrating their anniversary, maybe a heartbroken friend sharing quotes about finding themselves. What strikes you is how everyone seems to be seeking the exact same thing, yet experiencing it in completely different ways. This, Fromm argues, is our first glimpse into love's paradoxical nature. The most fundamental paradox that Fromm identifies is this beautifully complex dance between union and individuality. Think about it for a second. When we fall in love, what do we crave? We want to merge with another person to become one, to share everything. We use language like my other half or soulmate, suggesting that love completes us somehow. But here's where it gets interesting and frankly a bit mind-bending. True love, according to Fromm, actually requires us to be fully ourselves, completely individual and autonomous, in order to have something genuine to offer another person. It's like trying to make the perfect cup of coffee. You need two distinct elements, the coffee and the water, each maintaining their essential properties, to create something new and beautiful together. If you just had water, you'd have nothing. If you somehow had pure coffee essence without water, it would be undrinkable. The magic happens in the combination, but only when each element brings its authentic self to the mixture. Now, think about this in terms of modern relationships. How often do we see people losing themselves in love? They start dressing differently, adopting their partner's interests, maybe even changing their career paths to align with someone else's dreams. Fromm would say this isn't love at all, but rather a form of symbiosis that ultimately destroys the very thing that made the relationship special in the first place. When we dissolve our individuality, we have nothing unique left to contribute to the union. But here's another fascinating paradox that Fromm explores. Love demands both complete vulnerability and incredible strength. To truly love someone, you have to open yourself up entirely, remove all your armor, and risk being hurt. Yet this act of vulnerability requires tremendous inner strength and security. It's like being asked to perform a high-wire act without a net while simultaneously being told to relax and enjoy the view. Most of us spend our lives building walls to protect ourselves from pain, and love asks us to tear them all down. Consider how this plays out in our digital age. We have more ways to connect than ever before, yet rates of loneliness and depression continue to climb. We can text someone instantly, see what they're doing through their stories, even video chat across continents. But somehow, this incredible connectivity often leaves us feeling more isolated than ever. Fromm would argue that we're experiencing the paradox of connection without genuine encounter. We're reaching for union through increasingly sophisticated means, while simultaneously protecting ourselves from the vulnerability that real intimacy requires. There's also what Fromm calls the paradox of freedom within love. True love, he argues, liberates both people involved. When you genuinely love someone, you want them to flourish, to become their fullest self, even if that means they might grow in directions you didn't expect or prefer. But this creates an almost impossible tension. The very act of loving someone deeply makes you more invested in their choices and well-being. Yet love demands that you give them complete freedom to make those choices, even ones that might hurt you or take them away from you. Think about parents watching their children grow up. The love they feel compels them to want to protect and guide, but genuine love also requires them to step back and allow their children to make their own mistakes, find their own paths, and ultimately become independent. It's simultaneously an act of holding on and letting go. Perhaps the most profound paradox Fromm identifies is that love is both the most selfish and most selfless act possible. When we love someone, we do it because of how they make us feel, because of what they bring to our lives, because they fulfill something in us. In that sense, love is inherently selfish. Yet true love also compels us to care for another person's well-being as much as, or sometimes more than, our own. We find ourselves willing to sacrifice, to compromise, to put someone else's needs first. These paradoxes aren't problems to be solved, Fromm suggests, but rather tensions to be embraced and navigated with wisdom and maturity. Love isn't meant to be simple or straightforward. Its complexity is part of what makes it both challenging and transformative. Understanding these paradoxes doesn't make love easier, but it does make it more honest and ultimately more sustainable. As we move forward in exploring Fromm's insights, keep these paradoxes in mind. They're not just philosophical curiosities, but practical realities that every loving relationship must navigate. The question isn't how to eliminate these tensions, but how to dance with them gracefully. You know, we've been talking about love as this deeply personal, intimate experience, but here's where Fromm throws us a curveball that might make you pause mid-sip of your coffee. He argues that love doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just about two hearts beating as one in some romantic bubble. The society we live in, the economic system we're part of, the cultural values we breathe like air every single day, all of this shapes how we love, whether we can love, and what we even think love means. Picture this for a moment. You're sitting in a cafe, watching couples around you. That young pair frantically checking their phones between stolen glances, the business executive cutting short a romantic dinner for an urgent call, the elderly couple who seem more like business partners than lovers. What you're witnessing isn't just individual choice. It's society in action, molding love itself. Fromm makes a fascinating observation that our capitalist society has turned love into something resembling a market transaction. Think about it, don't we often approach relationships like we're shopping? We want the best deal, the most attractive package, someone who brings value to our lives. We talk about people being out of our league or someone being a catch. When did love start sounding like a business negotiation? Here's where it gets really interesting. In our modern world, we're taught to be consumers first, humans second. We learn to acquire things, to possess them, to show them off. But love, real love, can't be possessed like a new car or a designer handbag. Yet we try, don't we? We get jealous when our partner talks to someone attractive. We want exclusive access, like we've purchased premium membership to another person's heart. Fromm argues that this possessive attitude is actually the enemy of love. When you try to own someone, you're not loving them, you're collecting them. It's like trying to capture a butterfly and wondering why it stops being beautiful once it's pinned to your wall. The very act of possession destroys what made you want to possess it in the first place. Now think about this. How does our society define success? Usually through individual achievement, competition, getting ahead of others. But love requires the exact opposite. Love demands that you see another person as equally important as yourself, that you care about their growth and happiness, sometimes even more than your own. Can you see the conflict here? We're trained all day to be competitive, self-focused achievers. Then we come home and wonder why we struggle to be loving, generous partners. Consider how exhausted we all are. In Fromm's time, people were already feeling the strain of industrial society, but imagine what he'd say about our current world. We're available 24/7, always connected, always productive, always optimizing something. When you're running on empty, when you're stressed about work, money, or the next deadline, how much emotional energy do you really have left for love? It's like trying to water a garden with an empty watering can. The tragedy is that we often seek love as an escape from this exhaustion, but we bring our tired, competitive, consumer mindset right into our relationships. We want our partner to make us happy, to fill the void that our society has created. But that's not love, that's emotional outsourcing. We're basically saying, I can't figure out how to be fulfilled by this crazy world we've created, so please do it for me. Fromm points out something that might surprise you. In many traditional societies, despite their flaws and limitations, people had clearer roles, stronger communities, and more stable foundations for love to grow. Not because those societies were perfect, but because they provided something our modern world often lacks: a genuine human connection and shared meaning. When your whole village knows your story, when you have rituals that connect you to something larger than yourself, when your work has clear purpose and rhythm, you might actually have more emotional bandwidth for love. But here's the thing, Fromm isn't suggesting we go backward. Instead, he's challenging us to see how our current society makes love harder, so we can consciously choose to love differently. It's like being a gardener who realizes the soil is contaminated. You don't stop gardening, you learn to work with better soil. What would it look like to love in a way that resists society's pressure to commodify everything? Maybe it means choosing presence over productivity when you're with someone you care about. Maybe it means celebrating your partner's success without immediately comparing it to your own. Maybe it means building relationships based on who people are becoming, not just what they can do for you right now. The beautiful thing is that when we love authentically, we're not just healing ourselves, we're creating little pockets of resistance against a society that often feels cold and transactional. Every time you choose to really listen, instead of just waiting for your turn to speak, every time you support someone's growth even when it's inconvenient for you, you're proving that another way is possible. This brings us to a crucial question that Fromm wants us to wrestle with. If society shapes how we love, then what kind of society would actually support love to flourish? And more importantly, how do we begin creating that society, one relationship at a time? Because ultimately, the way we love each other is the way we build the world we want to live in. Picture this. You're sitting in your favorite coffee shop, watching couples at nearby tables. Some are deep in conversation, their eyes locked, completely present with each other. Others are scrolling through their phones, physically together but emotionally worlds apart. This scene perfectly captures one of the most profound paradoxes that Erich Fromm explores in The Art of Loving. the intricate dance between love and solitude, and how our relationship with being alone fundamentally shapes our capacity to truly love another person. Now here's something that might surprise you. Fromm argues that the ability to be alone, genuinely, peacefully alone, is actually a prerequisite for authentic love. This flies in the face of everything our culture tells us, doesn't it? We're constantly bombarded with messages that being alone means being lonely, that solitude equals failure, that we need another person to complete us. But Fromm turns this notion completely on its head. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to jump from relationship to relationship, never taking time to breathe between partners? They're like someone frantically switching radio stations, desperate to find any signal rather than sitting with the silence. Fromm would say these individuals are confusing love with what he calls symbiotic union, a desperate merging that's really just two incomplete people trying to become one whole person. It's not love. It's mutual dependency dressed up in romantic clothing. Here's where Fromm's insight becomes revolutionary. He suggests that genuine love can only emerge between two people who are already whole unto themselves. Imagine two circles that touch at their edges rather than overlapping completely. Each circle maintains its integrity, its own center, while still connecting meaningfully with the other. This is the kind of relationship that Fromm champions, one where solitude isn't the enemy of love, but its very foundation. But what does healthy solitude actually look like? It's not the bitter isolation of someone who's given up on human connection, nor is it the frantic busyness we use to avoid being alone with our thoughts. True solitude, according to Fromm, is the ability to be fully present with yourself, to sit quietly without needing external validation, entertainment, or distraction. It's knowing who you are when no one else is watching, when there's no audience to perform for, no role to play. Consider the difference between someone who enjoys their own company and someone who merely tolerates it. The first person might spend a Saturday afternoon reading, cooking, or simply sitting in their garden, feeling genuinely content. They're not waiting for someone to rescue them from themselves. The second person fills every moment with noise, television, social media, phone calls, anything to avoid the discomfort of their own thoughts and feelings. Fromm understood something that modern psychology has confirmed. People who can't be alone often make poor partners because they're essentially asking their loved ones to be their emotional life support system. They're not bringing their full, authentic selves to the relationship. Instead, they're bringing their neediness, their fear, their desperate hunger for someone else to make them feel whole. Now, think about the relationships you've observed or experienced. The healthiest ones, aren't they between people who seem complete on their own but choose to share their lives together? These are the couples who can spend time apart without anxiety, who maintain their individual friendships and interests, who don't lose themselves in the relationship, but rather expand through it. Fromm also recognized that our modern world has made genuine solitude increasingly difficult to achieve. We live in an age of constant connectivity, where being alone often means being alone with our devices, rather than truly alone with ourselves. The average person today experiences what we might call pseudo-solitude, physically alone, but mentally scattered across dozens of digital interactions, notifications, and distractions. This digital overwhelm has created what Fromm might have called a new form of alienation. We're simultaneously more connected and more isolated than any generation in human history. We can video chat with someone on the other side of the world while feeling completely disconnected from the person sitting next to us on the subway. We've mastered the art of avoiding solitude while remaining fundamentally alone. The practical wisdom here is profound. Before we can truly love another person, we must learn to love ourselves, not in a narcissistic way, but in the sense of being comfortable with who we are when all the external validation falls away. This means developing what Fromm calls productive orientation, the ability to create meaning, joy, and purpose from within rather than constantly seeking it from others. Here's a beautiful metaphor that captures Fromm's thinking. Imagine love as a duet rather than a solo performance. In a true duet, each voice remains distinct and beautiful on its own, but together they create something even more magnificent. If one singer is constantly trying to drown out the other or desperately seeking validation from the audience, the music becomes discord rather than harmony. As we move deeper into Fromm's exploration of love's many dimensions, remember this fundamental truth. The path to loving others authentically begins with the courage to sit quietly with yourself, to know yourself deeply, and to find peace in your own company. Only from this foundation of genuine selfhood can we extend ourselves toward another in the generous, creative act that Fromm calls mature love. This isn't about becoming selfish or isolated. It's about becoming so secure in your own being that you can love others freely, without the desperate neediness that masquerades as romance in our culture. Picture this. You're sitting with a friend who's just gotten engaged and they're glowing with happiness, but there's something in their eyes that looks almost trapped. They keep talking about how they belong to someone now, how they're complete, and you can't shake the feeling that something fundamental is being misunderstood about what love actually means. This tension between love and freedom isn't just a modern dilemma. It's one of the most profound paradoxes of human existence, and Erich Fromm tackles it head-on with the kind of insight that makes you want to completely rethink everything you thought you knew about relationships. Here's where most of us get it completely wrong. We think love and freedom are opposites, that to truly love someone means giving up our independence, surrendering our autonomy, merging so completely that we lose ourselves in another person. Fromm argues this isn't love at all. It's what he calls symbiotic union, and it's actually the enemy of genuine love. Think about it this way. When you see couples who seem to have lost their individual identities, who can't make a decision without consulting each other about what to have for breakfast, who speak in we so constantly that you forget they were ever separate people, are you witnessing love, or are you witnessing two people who are terrified of being alone? The beautiful paradox that Fromm reveals is that real love actually requires freedom, not just tolerates it. Imagine trying to give someone a gift while holding a gun to their head, demanding they accept it. The moment you remove choice, you remove the possibility of genuine love. Love, by its very nature, must be freely given, freely received, and freely maintained. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. Now think about this. What does it mean to love someone freely? Fromm suggests that mature love is only possible between two people who have achieved what he calls individuation, people who have become fully themselves, who have their own center, their own sense of purpose and identity. It's like two strong trees growing side by side. Their branches may intertwine beautifully, but their roots remain distinct and strong. When people haven't developed this individual strength, what they call love is often just mutual dependency, two drowning people clinging to each other instead of learning to swim. Consider the modern dating world, where we swipe through potential partners like we're shopping for accessories to complete our outfits. How often do we hear people say they're looking for their other half, or their soulmate, who will complete them? Fromm would say this entire approach is backwards. If you're not complete as an individual, if you're looking for someone else to fill the holes in your identity, then what you're seeking isn't love. It's a cure for loneliness, anxiety, and the fundamental human fear of freedom itself. The freedom that love requires isn't just the freedom to choose your partner. It's the ongoing freedom to continue choosing them, day after day, not because you have to, not because you're trapped by circumstances or social expectations, but because you genuinely want to. It's the freedom to disagree, to grow in different directions, to maintain your own friendships, interests, and dreams. Real love says, I choose you, and I want you to be fully yourself, even if that self is different from what I expected or hoped for. But here's where it gets really interesting and challenging. This kind of freedom in love requires enormous courage and maturity from both people. It means accepting that the person you love might change, might grow in ways that surprise you, might even grow away from you. It means loving someone enough to let them be free, even when that freedom feels threatening to your security. Think about parents who truly love their children. They don't try to keep them dependent and close forever. They raise them to be independent, knowing that real love means preparing someone to live fully without you. Fromm uses the metaphor of two people standing on their own feet, able to walk independently, who choose to walk together. This is radically different from two people who are leaning on each other so heavily that if one moves, both fall down. In healthy love, each person maintains their own balance, their own direction, their own capacity for joy and meaning, and from that position of strength, they choose to share their journey with another. The practical implications of this understanding are revolutionary. It means that instead of asking, "How can I make this person love me?" or "How can I keep them from leaving?" we ask, "How can I become someone capable of loving freely? And how can I love this person in a way that honors their freedom and mine?" It transforms jealousy from a sign of love into a sign of immaturity, possessiveness from romantic into toxic, and dependency from sweet into suffocating. As we move deeper into Fromm's exploration of love's many facets, keep this paradox in mind. The people who love most freely are those who need love least, and the relationships that last longest are those where both people could walk away but choose to stay. This isn't a recipe for emotional distance. It's the foundation for the deepest intimacy possible, intimacy between two whole people rather than two fragments trying to become one. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a diving board, looking down at the water below. Your heart is racing, your palms are sweaty, and every rational part of your brain is screaming that this might not be the best idea. But then you take that leap anyway. That moment of surrender, that willingness to let go despite not knowing exactly what will happen next, that's faith. And according to Erich Fromm, it's absolutely essential for love to flourish. Now, when Fromm talks about faith and love, he's not talking about religious faith, though there are certainly connections. He's talking about something much more fundamental, something that touches every relationship we have. Think about it for a moment. When you tell someone you love them for the first time, what are you really doing? You're making yourself completely vulnerable. You're saying, in essence, "I believe in you, I believe in us, I believe in something that doesn't yet exist but could become beautiful." Fromm argues that without faith, love becomes nothing more than a business transaction. We start keeping score, measuring what we give against what we receive, building walls instead of bridges. But real love, the kind that transforms us and sustains us through life's inevitable storms, requires us to believe in the potential of another person even when we can't see it clearly ourselves. Consider the parent watching their teenager make what seems like every wrong choice possible. The grades are slipping, the attitude is terrible, and every conversation feels like a battle. Yet something inside that parent continues to believe in who their child could become. That's faith in love. It's not blind optimism or naive hope. It's a deep conviction that the person we love has within them the capacity for growth, for change, for becoming their best self. But here's where it gets really interesting. Fromm suggests that this faith in others is actually impossible without first having faith in ourselves. How can we believe in someone else's potential if we don't believe in our own? Think about the relationships in your life where you feel most loving and generous. Chances are, these are relationships where you also feel most authentically yourself, where you trust your own judgment and capacity for growth. This creates what Fromm calls a beautiful paradox. The more we have faith in ourselves, the more we can have faith in others. And the more we practice having faith in others, the stronger our faith in ourselves becomes. It's like a muscle that grows stronger with use, except this muscle builds connection instead of physical strength. Now, you might be wondering, what does this faith actually look like in practice? Let's say you're in a relationship where your partner has been struggling with a particular challenge. Maybe they're trying to change careers or overcome a bad habit. Faith doesn't mean pretending the problem doesn't exist or avoiding difficult conversations. Instead, It means approaching these challenges from a place of belief rather than fear. It means saying, I see you struggling, and I believe you have what it takes to work through this, rather than you always do this, you'll never change. Fromm also explores how our modern world makes this kind of faith increasingly difficult to maintain. We live in what he calls a culture of doubt, where skepticism is often confused with intelligence and cynicism is mistaken for sophistication. We're constantly bombarded with messages that other people are fundamentally selfish, that relationships are doomed to fail, that trust is naive. But what if this widespread cynicism is actually making us less capable of love, not more wise? Think about how we approach dating today. We swipe through profiles looking for red flags. We Google potential partners to uncover their past mistakes. We maintain emotional distance to protect ourselves from getting hurt. While some caution is certainly healthy, when does protective skepticism become a barrier to genuine connection? When does our fear of being disappointed prevent us from experiencing the joy of truly believing in someone? Fromm suggests that faith in love also requires what he calls rational faith, as opposed to irrational faith. Irrational faith ignores evidence and clings to fantasy. If your partner consistently lies to you, rational faith doesn't mean pretending they're honest. But rational faith does mean believing that people can change, that growth is possible, that the person who lies today might become someone who values truth tomorrow, if they choose to do the inner work required. This kind of faith becomes especially crucial during the inevitable difficult periods that every relationship faces. When the initial excitement fades, and you're left with the daily reality of loving an imperfect human being, faith is what carries you through. It's what helps you remember why you chose this person during moments when you can't quite recall what you saw in them. It's what allows you to invest in the relationship's future, even when the present feels challenging. Perhaps most importantly, Fromm reminds us that faith in love is ultimately an act of courage. It requires us to remain open in a world that often rewards those who close themselves off. It asks us to keep believing in beauty and goodness even when we're surrounded by evidence of human failing. But without this courage, without this willingness to have faith, we rob ourselves of love's greatest gift, the experience of being truly known and accepted by another human being. And isn't that risk worth taking? In The Art of Loving by Erich Fromm, we're reminded that love is not a passive emotion but a dynamic art that requires practice, understanding, and often a transformation of one's entire being. Fromm explores love as an expression of one's character, rather than as a fleeting feeling. Love, he posits, involves care, responsibility, respect, and knowledge, and it transcends the superficial depths often portrayed in modern culture. Here are 5 key takeaways to consider. 1. Love is an art. Approach love as an art form. Just like painting or playing an instrument, loving requires practice and dedication. Start incredibly small, with just a few minutes each day reflecting on how you can express love to those around you. 2. Practice self-love. You cannot fully love others if you do not love yourself. Begin by spending quiet moments alone, practicing self-care and reflection, recognizing your own worth and being patient with yourself. 3. Develop active listening. Truly understand others by listening actively. In everyday conversations, focus more on what the other person is saying than on what you want to say next. This requires patience and presence. 4. Care as a core principle. Show genuine care for others without expecting anything in return. This could be as simple as checking in on a friend or volunteering your time for a cause you believe in. 5. Love requires courage. Take small steps out of your comfort zone to express your feelings. Be brave in showing your vulnerabilities and honest in your expressions of love. Courage in love is about embracing uncertainties and taking risks for the sake of growth. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.